Welcome to Leadership Spotlight, a podcast that shines the spotlight on L&D and HR leaders from leading businesses around the world. Learn the ins and outs of everyday leadership, what it means to be a leader, and all the learning and skilling that goes into making a successful leader that you would like to follow. So lean in and lead on. In a career that spans leadership roles in blue chip organizations, epithets of the likes of talented, inspirational, empathetic are more than your role or personality descriptors. They are labels and identities that precede you, set up expectations, and define you. However, when we limit ourselves and others to the narrow definitions of these labels without awareness or lens of the bigger picture, we create a notion of static identity that's both disempowering and stagnating to growth. So, how do you peel back the layers of personal and professional labels, identities, and stereotypes that the society demands us to conform to? Meena Lochini Kumar, Global Leadership Development and Talent Management at Sutherland, tells us how, as she distills over 2 decades of experience across diverse industries in business, HR, and L&D transformation. An ex-board member of International Mentoring Association, she brings expertise in building centers of excellence in leadership development, learning and corporate mentoring, learning design, career architecture, organization culture building, and neuroscience-based coaching. Hi, ma'am. Welcome to the podcast.
So thank you so much, Pranjali, for inviting me. And as always, it's a pleasure to be talking.
So, your public profile, your interviews, the testimonials by your coworkers, your peers, everything that I see on LinkedIn and otherwise, it describes you as a coach, a mentor, a guide, a genuine person, a thorough professional. So, let's start by having you describe yourself.
Very, very lovely question. I think it's an opportunity for me to delve a little deeper in the next 2 minutes. But so I think I'm a very simple person, a positive and very happy person as well. I like to see the best in every situation, Pranjali. I'm a continuous learner. I can see that all my life. I've done that. Resilient is how leaders in my professional journey have described me. I'm also very passionate about children and nature. And what really puts me off, as I think, is dishonesty and lack of accountability. That's how I would sum myself, Pranjali.
That's beautiful, ma'am. And one of the other epithets that's used as a prefix or a suffix with your name is cancer survivor. Let's dig a bit deeper into this. I want to understand how this label serves you with respect to your own identity. Is it limiting? Is it disempowering? Or do you think it's an enabler or a motivator that propels you further?
Well, that's a deep question again. So let me step back. So, in the beginning of 2004, when I encountered cancer the first time, I think I soaked in self pity for a few days, like many would. I was no different. Then I realized it's in my own hands which side of the fence I wanted to be. So it took a lot of working on my mindset to take it as a huge learning and turn this around to build my self identity on a positive note. So, cancer in hindsight has been the biggest inflection for me in life. So, it probably taught me life's worth in just a few months. And I believe once you experience cancer, your lens to the world changes permanently. In those days, there was a lot of stigma attached to the disease, as I remember. But now I see the world has evolved and there is a lot of acceptance that cancer survivors find. It's definitely been a motivator for me. Now, when the disease resurfaced in 2018, however, it made me all the more bold and reflective, I must say. So it's a paradox of sorts. There was plenty of learning from a very human angle. And I think I cherish my every moment today, Pranjali.
Absolutely, ma'am. And knowing you, I know you are doing this day on day so beautifully. But I also want to understand how these labels or identities from the perspective of others, do they kind of confirm you to a particular box that you think you have to limit yourselves to?
Well, I think, in a way, it's quite a task since we have to break our own mental models when we start looking at others and seeing the way they view us. Because a lot of our mental models have allowed us to, or our mental models have formed over the years with inputs and observations from people, society, cultures at large. So sometimes, conditioning to see people with a societal or cultural lens becomes natural for others as much as it is for us. And perhaps that's the easiest, I must say. Now, what remains hard or has been hard for me is the unwiring of my own habits. So, I can suggest a very simple habit that I have actually followed over the years to make sure that I am not biased in my views or I don't bucket people as often. And I think this is a bit to do with neuroscience. So every time I feel I'm bucketing someone or someone else is viewing me with a particular lens, I've taught my brain to ring a bell to say, do I have enough data points for me to think in that direction? Initially, I must tell you, Pranjali, it was a very difficult task because we all forget and we flow naturally into the situation of sometimes being biased and sometimes also plotting people in buckets or in graphs, actually. But I think with enormous practice and a lot of mindfulness, all of us can make sure that we are not walking the path of bias or walking the path where we are viewing people with a particular societal or cultural lens. And this practice of telling your brain to remind you of it every time, I can definitely vouch that it changed the way I looked at many things around me.
You touch a very valid point about neuroscience, because neuroscience has showed us that we are everything that our minds ask us to do. We are the programs of the
Right.
past. So, what this means, in my opinion, is that we are conditioned,
Mhm.
as you said, by society, by culture, by a family, religion, the entire dogma that we
Mhm.
reside in, to such a large extent that stereotyping, labeling gets embedded into a subconscious
True.
mind. And we do it without any conscious or cognitive
Correct.
realization. And you also mentioned this, that we need to change those mental models or habit loops. And to break out, we need to be self aware so that we can interrupt this old circuitry, if I may say so, so that new habit loops are inserted and new thought patterns replace them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is what is called neuroplasticity, Pranjali, wherein the brain has the capacity to adapt to whatever we are feeding it, and it has the capacity to kind of accommodate as much new circuitry. And you're very right. So it's not very difficult to develop new habits as much as it is pretty difficult to break old habits. So, yes, completely with you.
Which is where I would like to ask more about self awareness or self
Mhm.
reflection. How do you think we can be accountable for our own actions and
Mhm.
behaviors? Maybe by holding an accountability
Mhm.
mirror that empowers us to call out our
Hmm.
shortcomings. So I may be aware of something I'm not very good at or I'm good at, but I can at least call it
Hmm.
out and be non judgmental towards
Hmm.
myself while also carving a path towards corrective measures or
Beautiful.
improvement.
So I would probably say that we need two things for us to kind of get to the point where we realize our own selves and we are able to drive accountability not only for us, but for everyone else around. So the first one is how mindful you are. And the second one is the maturity you bring to the table as a leader. So when I talk of mindfulness, again, there are two aspects to it, right? So sometimes, we see people are not accountable, not because they want to do that deliberately, but sometimes they're not even aware that they're not accountable, right? So it stems back to the fact, how mindful are we about the pieces that we want to focus on? So if you have to again step back about mindfulness, mindfulness is about two pieces. It's made of two pieces, actually. So one is how attentive you are to the current action that you are doing. So whether to current task, to a current action, to a current thought, to a current pattern. So that's the first bit of it. The second of it is more of self-awareness that you touched upon. So self-awareness is your ability to remove distractions from whatever is preventing you from being focused, which is being mindful, right? So in essence, you need to be very self-aware of what you need to remove in the form of distractions, as much as you are able to pay attention to what is most required or what has to be prioritized for an outcome. So once, we start developing this aspect of mindfulness around us, automatically we start finding that our focus becomes much sharper, and it leads us to a point where we are delivering and doing our best, and therefore we become accountable. On a completely different note, there's a lot of maturity that one needs to have when it comes to accountability. So either you can say that, I was responsible and I was not accountable, and, wash your hands off or not own what you're supposed to do. Or you can say, while I am still responsible for a few things that I'm supposed to deliver, as a leader, I have to ensure that the entire task at hand is completed to perfection. And that is where a leader's USP or a leader's differentiator stems in. So I would say, if we were to become more accountable, we definitely need to be more mature in terms of a systemic view of the organization. What does the organization want in totality, end to end? And can I help the organization by adding value in that space? And the second one is, you need to constantly think about how mindful you are when it comes to delivering projects, tasks, events, negotiations, people, all of that.
Absolutely. So, if I have to just summarize what you said, I think what we're talking about is being present in the
Yes.
moment, being hyper focused, and this focus should be in alignment with the bigger picture of the organization or the task
Yes.
at hand. All right. I'm going to go back to the label or the identity piece that we are talking about. In my opinion, labels by themselves are not oppressing or liberating. It is the associations, the expectations, the judgments that we attach to them that make them such. And going back to the neuroscience piece again, I think we subconsciously conform to them, oftentimes coming in our own way of a potential and of a vision for
Yes.
ourselves. There's this beautiful quote I read somewhere. I'm sorry, I may not be able to maybe say it correctly, but I'll try to paraphrase it the best way possible. It goes like this: I am not what I think of me. I am not what you think of me. I am what I think you think of me.
Brilliant. True. Very, very true.
Which is where I now want you to tell me more about identities, labels in the workplace. And the reason I'm asking this is because even today, organizations celebrate titles, we celebrate levels. So there is probably a pragmatic reason why it's done, but how do you think it really works or plays into everyone's subconscious and conscious minds?
That's a brilliant question and a brilliant quote as well. So, several years ago, I was part of an organization called Mindtree, and I remember there was a program called Influencing Without Titles. And I think it was a very powerful one that we kind of got deep into. Coming back to, our identities, here's what I would like to say. So when we look at it, we all have unique personas that have defined us as much as that has redefined us over time. So the question that we need to continuously ask ourselves is how focused are we about our identity? And it is important for us to drive back focus into our identity, because when we are cognizant of it, we will work well on managing it through life, and it's not about identity at the workplace, Pranjali. I think this flows seamlessly into your life, which is your personal life as well. So each of us, if I have to take a step back and reflect, we are all brands in the world in our own way, which means we also are custodians of many events, people, careers, and, oftentimes our character consistency reflects our identity. So, when I look at the current workplace, the current workforce, or if I look at a workforce of tomorrow, I think identity is going to become all the more important, because we are living in a very meshed digital world. And the probability or chances of us getting influenced more than ever by multiple personas that we see or experience, I do fear that there may be chances of a diluted identity for ourselves. So in more ways than one, I do believe at the workplace it's important to be cognizant of the identity that you are, which has evolved over time, and also be cognizant of the identity that you want to carry forward. And that all the more drives me to the point of being more self-aware, mindful, and to also feel proud about our, and cherish the identity that we are and we carry. Very often we forget that there are so many lovely elements about us, and the focus is always about how can I get better, which is good, which is a fantastic thing to do, but retain the positive identity that you have while working on those aspects which are softer, that create an identity for you. For example, your knowledge, the learning that you bring to the table, the perspectives that you bring, that will evolve. But retain your originality when it comes to your behaviors, your thought patterns, which can evolve to some extent, but will remain constant to a large extent.
Don't you think this is a double-edged sword? So while on one hand it helps you create this bigger, brighter vision for yourself, on the other it also leads to stereotyping, not just for yourself, but how we also perceive others.
Well, it's again being very conscious. Like, this has to tie back to what we spoke earlier, right? I mean, it is a double-edged sword, and that is where you being aware, and I said, we need to constantly give ourselves the alarm signal in our brain to say that while I am focusing on my identity, it's so important that I do not ensure that somebody's identity is broken, or I'm not pushing them to be bucketed in a particular slot because that view doesn't conform with the view or concur with the view that I bring to the world. So I think it's a very fine balance. It's a seamless one. And before you know, you can actually end up plotting and slotting someone else. So I think it's a seamless flow, but I think with practice and a lot of awareness, one will be able to and should be able to, with maturity, to keep these different and apart.
Agreed. So we spoke about awareness, we spoke eloquently about reflection, mindfulness, consciousness. How can L&D, through maybe training interventions, culture building, assist in either dismantling the stereotypes which are limiting or creating new identities for people?
Lovely. So while L&D has played a role and a continuous role in organizations, I think increasingly in the future of tomorrow, L&D will have a very huge role to play, and a very significant and strategic role as well. So when you look at it, the workforce that we see is nothing but an extended persona of the organization at large. So as leaders, especially when you're steering L&D functions, it is our responsibility to provide that autonomy to people to be choosing their development areas, including their personas. At the same time, you need to be providing the right choices to choose from. That is where the intellect of the L&D professional comes to play. Now, those right choices should be aligned to the aspirational organization that we want to create, that we want to build, that we want to nurture. So creating awareness about biases, enabling experiences that break the stereotype mold. That could be through mentoring, it could be through coaching, it could be, building thought diversity and inclusion of the outliers that we see consciously, I believe can go a long way in dismantling stereotypes. Now, this definitely leads to a positive workforce. And certainly, I think we will be targeting a holistic workplace when you start doing these interventions such as mentoring or coaching and building thought diversity through diversity and inclusion. So I think that's the bigger role L&D will have in the years to come.
Lovely. So I hear you talk about personalized learning and also that the curation of it is still up to the L&Ds.
Yes.
How do you think people are lapping it up? Do people take it up knowing that this is in their own benefit? Or do you think it still needs an extra nudge or push for people to go in that direction of self-development?
So, you know what? Whenever we talk of self-development, and if we have to tie it back to neuroscience, And I've seen worlds where we had to kind of push people into a training room, to the world now where individualized learning is kind of playing a big role in organizations, right? So when you look at it, it all again depends on the autonomy that you provide for a learner. For example, if as a manager I am mandating that you need to be doing a course in communication, and somewhere your antennae tells you that no, I am pretty good in communication, so why should I do it? That is where the basic rub off happens, right? So we are increasingly looking at a workforce which have a lot of choices that they have grown up with. I mean, as one of the Harvard professors says, we live in an era of a paradigm of choices. So right from childhood, these are the kids who have seen choices. They've been given the option to choose, and then they're coming to a workforce where we are stipulating specific learnings. That's not going to go well. And that is where it's important for us as L&D professionals to also look at it with a different lens, to say, what is it that will excite the learner? However, that should be in alignment with what my organization's vision or goals is. So it's like, instead of giving one or two, can you give him a kitty of 10 to 12 courses from which he feels he has the right and the authority to choose? And with that autonomy, you find that the learning and the consumption of learning will shift. And that's a major, major inflection you can create in terms of culture building in organizations. So yes, it's important for us to be cognizant and conscious about what the learner needs to learn from a capability building. But it's also important for us to put on the lens to provide a set of choices from which he can choose. And then you can see learning and self-development happen in a much faster pace.
Awesome. And because we are talking about choices, I can't help but bring in millennials into this conversation. And I'm sorry that I'm probably going to label them such in spite of how the narrative of this conversation is. But how do you think instant gratification really plays into a millennial
Oh,
mindset?
well, it's again, yes, as much as we are generalizing, I also see outliers there. I've experienced outliers there. So let me kind of put that up front. However, see, what you are when you are at the workforce is a combination of whatever you have seen, experienced, and been conditioned to. So, in the generation that we are today, we are in an attention era. So, there's so much information that is flowing for you that you have to pay attention to many, many things. And you've also, on the other side, grown up in an era where you want something, you get it. It's not like you'll have to go to the library to pick up, wait for that book to come in, to read will take about 2 months, and then go back and hand the book over back. Today, you want anything, there's information available on your fingertips. And that's how the generation of today have grown up. So instant gratification definitely affects the way a person thinks at the workplace, because everything is to do with what can I get now? And the tolerance and patience bit has definitely narrowed down, and there's a delta that I observe. So I think it's so important for us to understand that they've grown up in an era of instant gratification. And therefore, we really need to see, one, how can we work on their mindsets to kind of give logic and explain as to why that may not be workable every time at the workplace. And two, how can we also align to giving them a bit of what they want, so that there is a sense of partial gratification that you can create for the user. Because ultimately, everybody is a consumer today, including people within organizations. They're consumers of learning, they're consumers of knowledge, and we shouldn't forget that.
Absolutely. I think this speaks so beautifully into the personalization that you spoke about, being cognizant of what your audience looks like and then devising a strategy that aligns to them as much as it does to your
Correct.
company.
Correct.
All right. Ma'am, before I let you go, can you share your leadership mantra with us?
Yes, of course. So I think it is think simple, be simple, stay happy. That's my leadership mantra.
It's a simple and a profound one, I must say.
Yes, Pranjali.
Thank you so much for an insightful conversation, ma'am. It was rich, it was lively, and everything that I really have come to associate with you. I'm sure it would benefit all our listeners in a profound way. So thank
As
you
I
so much.
keep, saying in multiple forums, I think the depth of responses truly depends on the depth of questions. So thank you for all those lovely questions that maybe made me think, bring out my insights over the years and respond. So thank you for that great interview, Pranjali. Rock on.
Thank you for tuning in to Leadership Spotlight. To learn how you can go from learning to leading, visit www.plathoralearning.com. See you next time.